Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Brand Talks Live. What constitutes brand appeal?
I mean, I suppose a lot of people, especially in our community, kind of think, well, you know, branding is a logo, but it's obviously much more than that. It's what your business stands for. It's, you know, how you speak to your consumer, your customers across all your communications. And I think most importantly, it's how you like emotionally connect to your to your consumer. And actually, we had an amazing speaker at Bread and Jam a couple of years ago, and he really made me, he crystallized this kind of idea of how branding is about emotionally connecting to people. He's a guy called, actually, Andrew, you might know him. He's Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, the Black Farmer. And he's amazing kind of marketeer and branding person and communicator. And his classic story that I think illustrates this quite well is how he came up with the name the Black Farmer. He was in telly before, and he bought himself like a farm in the West Country, and everyone around there called him the Black Farmer. And he was like, oh, that's an interesting name. I really want to start a food brand, and that's an interesting name. And he tried it around, and he did some focus groups, and everyone was like, oh, the Black Farmer. I'm not really sure. I'm not comfortable. I feel it's making me feel something, but I'm not sure what it's making me feel. And Wilfred was like, so basically the advice was, don't use it. It makes people feel uncomfortable. Don't use this name. But Wilfred was like, no, it makes an emotional connection. It makes people feel something. So therefore, this is the ideal name. So I think, yeah, you know, it's got to do everything. It's got to be the right colors, and it's got to be the right palette, and it's got to be the right, you know, logo, but also it's got to emotionally connect.
So true. Yeah, I think the emotional connection is absolutely the most important thing, you know, in our experience in terms of, you know, people think of brand, as you say, Jason, they talk about logos and colors, and I think it sort of springs, the visual identity is often what people associate with the brand, but actually it's the voice, it's the message, and it's that will connect. And all of that aesthetic kind of attributes, they will all contribute to that, and it's, you know, they can't be undervalued. But you're right, there's no point in having something that looks lovely if it doesn't speak to you. And often it's the most functional statements that hit you between the eyes. And you're right, Black Farmer's one we were just chatting about, you know, through the lens of brands that we admire and that are doing a really good job of that. And I think, you know, he's done a really good job of just kind of saying it as it is. But then when you look at the brand and you unpack it, there's so much more going on. But it's that first kind of statement that's what people were referring to him as. So why try and do something else?
Yeah, and maybe it's, you know, if you have an emotional reaction, it's as simple as that you'll therefore remember it, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Don't they say that people don't remember what you do or what you say? They remember how you make them feel. And that is just so powerful in the context of brand. We're actually interviewing Wilfred next week for our Brand Talks podcast. So I am so excited about meeting him and hearing his full story. So for anyone interested in that, definitely keep an eye out and tune in for that podcast. But yeah, it really is about the emotional connection.
I think the other thing that's interesting is the kind of relationship between product and brand, because, you know, you do have to have a product that people want or people need to start with, you know, or you may, in our case, you may have to educate them in order that they then realize that they want or need that. But the product is the nucleus also of the brand often. So for a brand to connect and land in the way that Jason and Andy have mentioned, you know, it has to have integrity. So you know, that the brand, the product is part of the brand, the way the product is put together, you know, in this case, you know, maybe where it's grown, how it's grown, you know, and what are the values that start with the actual creation of the product, and why, you know, you had the motivation for creating the product in the first place, and then that extends into, you know, your brand values, your personality, your tone of voice, you know, all of that combines. So it's a whole universe, really. But it has to be, you know, it's like a stick of rock, you know, it has to have the same idea running throughout all of it, from the product through to the communications.
Yeah,
100%. Sorry, Andy, I was just going to say it's a problem I do see with a lot of startups. I either have a really, you know, coherent, brilliant kind of brand and a crap product, or a great product and the crap branding. You know, they're finding that balance, maybe because, you know, they're different size of the brain or something, I don't know, but you got to get that balance 100%.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's we see it a lot. You know, talking to different brands in different stages of their life cycle as well. You know, and Jason, you come through, you see an awful lot of those early stage ones, I'm sure, with the bread and jam, but also obviously with your kind of contributors being much more further down the line. I do think that it is a two sides of the brain piece. I think you're right. People find it very hard to know, if you just talk about, you know, investment, for example, you know, where to invest the investment they have into product development, or, you know, manufacturing, packaging, versus the brand itself, and then how that brand story is articulated, and then how it's, you know, how it's distributed, how it's got out there on social media or wherever it might be. It's a constant challenge. I think you're right, though. If you start, as you said, Andrew, from that authentic kind of, okay, this is what makes us who we are, whether that be where your approach to sourcing your materials, whether it be the packaging, whatever it might be, or often, you know, increasingly people want to know the story of why it came to be in the first place. You know, that may be a differentiator, and how you then articulate that. I was at the lunch show last week, as you guys probably were as well, but you know, it's really interesting to walk around Excel and see some of those brands that are kind of competing with each other, but they have such different stories to tell, and some of them who are really doing a great job of kind of tapping into that authentic something that makes them unique. Even though the product might not be unique, it's kind of their journey that's made them unique, and what they believe in, versus those that are kind of, you know, maybe all about the product but struggling a little bit. And I was actually at the coffee festival in the morning as well before that, and the coffee being a really interesting one, where it's, you know, a bit like the world of chocolate, which is changing, but, you know, coffee just kind of, it's beans, they're grown in only a very few places around the world. And then obviously it's how they're then, how you're sourcing those, how you're dealing with the farmers, but also then how you're dealing with it when you actually produce the coffee itself. And some of them have really gone in on the whole farmer, you know, ethically sourcing the right farmer, making sure they get their share and all the rest of it. Others are really about the completely other end of the spectrum, which was the flavor and how they roast it and prepare it. So you know, a very simple thing, a coffee bean, but the story can be completely different. And that was, you know, that really struck me as something that is, you know, I think people struggle with that. Which part of that do we zoom in on? Because if you try and tell the whole story, then, you know, you can lose interest, and it becomes, you know, it just becomes a very difficult thing to articulate.
It's really interesting talking about this, Andrew, just in the context of Aduna. So talking about this idea of identifying a need, then producing a really great product, and then kind of wrapping that in the brand and telling the story. It must have been challenging in the beginning for you guys, because you're kind of harnessing the power of superfoods. So there's like an education piece for the consumer as well, right? So you've got, and then there's also the incredible work that you're doing in those African countries. So you had a lot of elements to the story to communicate. So just kind of honing in on Andy's point there. What do you zone in on? What do you highlight?
Yeah, I think it's been a whole learning process for us. And anyway, I came from, you know, I started my career working in advertising and branding, so I had a head start. But even so, you know, distilling the Aduna message, you know, is still a work in progress, to be honest. You know, we're almost 10 years in.
Sure, ever evolving.
Yes, and learning from mistakes and improving and refining. But I think, you know, our business and our proposition is quite different. Our model is quite different from most people, because you would normally, the way you would normally do things, as you said, is you would start by identifying a consumer need and filling it with a product. Whereas in our case, we started with the product, which was a baobab fruit, and then we set out to create the market. Normally you start with the market and create the product. In our case, we started with a product that no one had heard of, and then we set out to create the market. So that is already kind of going against business logic, really.
Already a big job on your hands.
That's part of our, you know, that's part of our social mission, and our model is about the creation of demand. So yeah, then we were also launching the brand and trying to launch this ingredient baobab at the same time, and that was very challenging because the word baobab no one had heard of, and the word Aduna no one had heard of, and people didn't know which one was the brand and which one was the product, you know, and people would go, oh, the guys from Baobab are here, because we were trying to push Baobab first, you know, and so Baobab was bigger on the packaging than Aduna, and people knew us as Baobab for years. So but I think, like, I would say, you know, what we've maybe to try to like crystallize some learnings from us, if I think about how they can be applied to maybe more conventional businesses and food and drink. The thing that we learned really is that, you know, the needs of the consumer comes first. No matter what it is that your social mission might be, or what you want to educate people about, or you're trying to use wasted product, that's brilliant. But first of all, consumers are kind of a bit selfish, really, like, you know, human beings. So what's in it for them? And if it's food or drink, number one has to be taste. Does it taste good? You know, do they enjoy it? And if it's got a health dimension, you know, what does it do for me? What is that? You know, what is the functional benefit? Those are like the two things you have to communicate about the product. And if you're a one product brand, then you're kind of lucky in a way, because your product is your brand, and you can name your brand, you know, in a way that it talks about the benefits of your product, like a naked bar or an innocent drink. You know, they've done a lot of hard work already, because you just from seeing the name. Whereas for us, Aduna, baobab, and we got superfood powders, and then we had energy bars, and then we had teas, and it's like, you know, it's very confusing proposition. Like, so the more simple your proposition can be, you know, the more that your brand can represent the benefits of your product. You know, the naming of your brand is so important, because, you know, you can really start off with a disadvantage if you name your brand wrongly, or in such a way that it doesn't easily convey what your brand or your product is about. So the branding starts, you know, as Andy said, you kind of interrogate. You've got a great product idea, you want to interrogate that product, and, you know, what other unique benefits of it? What other benefits that fit the need of the consumer? How should it be named to bring that to life? And then how, you know, what are all the other things you could do? So I'm a huge believer in brand, because I come from that world, and, you know, for me, brand is the gift that keeps on giving, and it's the easiest thing not to spend money on at the beginning, because you've got very little cash and you're trying to do a prototype, and the little you know, you haven't got anyone helping you, and spending whatever, you know, even the minimum you're going to have to spend is probably 10 or 20 grand, you know, if you go with freelancers and stuff. So it seems like a lot of money, but straightening all of that out from day one, you know, that is your foundation that you're building your whole house on, because then you're going to get marketing money in on top of that, and then you're going to start spending money pushing whatever that message is. And if you've skipped out that strategic branding phase, it's a false economy, because you really need to, you know, you need to really straighten that out and make sure that your proposition of your product, your proposition of the brand work together in a singular, a clear way as possible.
So that is exactly, Andrew, you're totally answering a question that's come through on the Q&A, is about where you focus your budget in those early days where budgets are limited. Is it product, or is it brand? Or a balance of the two.
But if you've got a product that you can sell, a prototype that you can sell in its current form, like at a market, for example, then go and do that. Don't spend a lot of money on brand. Go and prove that it sells, and then take that case and get some money. But if you need to, get the product into retail, etc., you're going to need to have a good brand to get into retail these days. There's a lot of good branding out there. So it depends on what your product is, and whether you're looking to raise money, etc. But having a really good brand, that will even help you to raise money as well.
Sure. So yeah, investment in brand can help when it comes to attracting investment.
Yeah, I was going to say the same as well. I think I agree 100%. The product has to come first, but at the same time, if you've got something that you can, as long as you can demonstrate some form of traction, some form of there's a demand there, people are responding positively to it, then I think you're right. The conversation is, how do you then grow it to the next level, and is that through investment? And typically that that's one of the limiting factors. So getting it out there, and also of course, conversations with retailers, they want to know that the brand is, as you said, Andrew, absolutely. There is so much good branding now out there. It's commanding, the consumer is being bombarded by all this compelling and authentic messaging, because everyone realizes that emotional importance that we touched on earlier. It's not rocket science, but doing it well is difficult. So having something that allows you to then the supermarkets and then the retailers to say, look, okay, this is a product I can see where this could sit, and this brand could really punch out amongst what we're currently working with. So yeah, I think investment is branding for investment is a key consideration. But at the same time, I do think that it comes back to what we said earlier on, having that you've got to have a story, you've got to have something.
If you've got a really good product, a really genuinely unique product, that's the answer. Because if you really have, then you can still go to speak to a big retailer with a product and a prototype. They'll be happy to see you. And then they're going to turn around to you and say, look, we really love it, but you're going to need to package it and brand it properly. And they're not going to give you a commitment, but they'll give you an indication. And then you have to go to investors and say, look, this is the product, but it's going to need to be packaged and branded properly. We need X amount of money.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I often see it as a very it's basically a continual process of the evolution of both the product and the branding. And I think, like Andrew was saying, I often see or often talk to startups about, you got to get your product out there at a farmer's market, test it, and get your mate to knock up a logo for you. And then if that's you get feedback, you learn, you iterate. You then take it to a deli, you need to improve your branding, kind of add a bit more to it. Then you take it to a specialty retailer like Whole Foods or Planet Organic. You're learning all the time. And especially at that stage, the retailers are super up for giving you a lot of advice on, positioning and your USPs and all that kind of stuff. And you actually use that period where you're slightly under the radar to kind of learn and work out, well, what bit of my story is resonating with people.
Definitely. And actually, what you wouldn't want to do is go out and spend 50 grand on branding and packaging before you've road tested your product and your proposition in the way that Jason's saying, because otherwise you're going to have, you're going to have to unpick all of that later on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, actually, most of the sort of brands that we speak to who, over the years who've come through funding, they've gone through, as exactly as you said, Jason, they've probably been through 3 or 4 iterations, from the stickers that they've stuck on themselves at home in the kitchen through to, gradually moving in the right direction. As you said, refining that based on feedback, what connects, which part of that story we talked about is the one that seems to be resonating with the type of audience that we want to be talking to. And you're right, it's often when you come into that sort of first round or second round funding where, okay, now we know what's going to work and now we need to invest because we don't want to be doing this again. You can only do that to a point, that kind of gradual iteration of the brand. Otherwise you just, become a chameleon. You keep changing.
And then the kind of like, I know this is a very well-known story, but in case the people in the audience haven't heard about it, I mean, one of my kind of brand kind of contemporaries from when I was working in advertising was Innocent, where that was a brand that was for me, that resonated with me and my friends when it kind of broke in like the early noughties. And what they did is, they their idea was very simple: fruit juice that was fresh rather than being preserved, and smoothies that were fresh. There actually wasn't, that didn't exist beforehand. There was just PJs, I think, if anyone remembers them.
Yeah.
And then they made it themselves, and then they went to a festival, and they gave them out and sold them really cheaply. And then they had 2 buckets. And one, they said, should we give up our jobs to to make this business? And they had a bucket which was yes, and a bucket which was no. And then everyone put their, everyone had voted yes, and they decided to go ahead with it. But they started with homemade labels. One of their founders was also an advertising agency guy, so he had a good idea of brand, how to make those labels and that tone of voice that was, unique to them. And then now it's a kind of horrible brand, to be honest, for me anyway. Now I don't touch innocent anymore.
But it was so unique at the time, wasn't it? It was so kind of, wow, this brand, this is just.
It was so refreshing. The tone of voice was so, and I think that, it was very simple. They didn't have to spend a lot of money on it, but it was, their point of difference with the product was reflected in their tone of voice, very simple tone of voice. And it resonated with a whole generation of people, I think.
Yeah.
So
it was like nothing else that was out there. And now that's obviously.
And they were very clever with their marketing as well, because I think one of the questions you talked about earlier is like, how do you bring a brand to life? And what they used to do, they had Veg Fest. So they had a fruit and veg fest in Regent's Park, where it was a really clean festival with loads of fruit and vegetables basically, and live music and stuff. And then they had these ice cream vans which had grass on the outside, which was serving smoothies. And it was just like, we always used to go to those veg fest.
Because it was different, and it was
it was fun. It was
cool.
fun, and it's like, how do you bring the brand to life in 3 dimensions as well? Different touch points for the consumer.
Yeah.
So Andrew, with Aduna, what kind of tactics do you guys employ in order to generate standout and to just kind of get that cut through?
Well, our brand is going to go through some. It's time for our brand to go through some evolution now, because I think that's the other thing with brands is they're not static. And Aduna, when we started it when we launched it, it's almost 10 years ago now, was I think quite innovative, and now for me it's starting to feel quite a little bit static and a little bit old-fashioned almost. So we need to go through some changes, but we're working on that. But when we started, it was it was quite innovative, and like we're celebrating products from Africa. And when at the time that we were working on the brand, if you looked at what any brand that was promoting products from Africa was doing it in a kind of fair tradey, kind of very worthy, kind of like this sympathy vote marketing kind of way, which already felt 10 years ago very out of date. And we wanted to create a brand that would actually celebrate the vitality and the vibrancy, the positivity of Africa, and be a premium brand and get away from that cliched narrative. Mm-hmm. And then we did things like at the trade shows, we construct our instead of having like printed banners and backdrops, we had a friend of mine who does set design. We did an installation. We are using kind of bits of recovered wood and stuff, so it was kind of like a beach bar, and it just had this kind of real warm, friendly, vibrant kind of glow to it, and everyone stopped to see it, so but yeah, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge as well that the market changes, society changes, time goes by, and you do have to, you can't stand still as a brand as well. Yeah, there's you can't afford to kind of go to sleep. So
yeah, That's really interesting, actually, that you say that, Andrew, about how, you know, the market is constantly evolving, what consumers are demanding is constantly evolving, and fair trade, incredible body, incredible organization, maybe does have that slightly kind of dated feel to it, and it is kind of feels a little bit like the sort of the sympathy vote, which maybe is not very of the moment right now, but whereas your brand is all about, you know, celebrating the vibrancy and the color and the beauty of Africa, rather than going down that kind of sympathy vote. So keeping an eye on those kind of changing feelings, and listening to what consumers are saying and wanting, that's an important point, right?
Yeah, and I think it's not just consumers. I mean, in our case, you know, it's very important, like everything that happened last summer with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, because we're very much engaged within the African and Black communities here in London, our partners, some investors, employees, you know, so that issue is really, really important to us. And we had to last summer kind of really take stock, and we did a big listening exercise with all our Black African stakeholders to get, you know, just to get their feedback and their honest, open feedback on, you know, how we're doing, you know, with our business model, with our representations of Africa, with, you know, everything really. And there's a lot that we learned from that exercise, which we're putting into action, because, you know, at the core of the brand is, you know, our mission, but also wanting to challenge perceptions of Africa, and to empower our partners in Africa. So you know, that listening is so important, to funnel that into the brand, and into the future of the brand.
From a practical point of view, Andrew, how did you carry out that listening exercise? Was it a forum? Was it a kind of workshop, or was it more a survey, like a kind of one-on-one survey?
I did that myself. So I just reached out to about 10 either Black and or African, some of our employees, former employees, partners in Ghana, investors, creative partners, and I just, you know, the whole thing was, look, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to take notes. I've got some questions, you know, and then kind of synthesized all of that, and then created a kind of report for our board. You know, gathered it by theme, crystallized it by theme. This is what it means for our business model. This is what it means for our HR. This is what it means for our brand. This is what it means for our communication, you know, and all of those things. And I created that into a kind of an action list, and we're still working through it.
Yeah.
But it will have, you know, it will have big impact for brand. And, you know, we've fed that into a brand, you know, a new brand strategy. And so, you know, we're still early days in that, but it will be, I think it's going to be very exciting what comes out of that for Aduna and for the market as well.
Yeah, and that will just make for just authenticity, won't it? Because all of that lovely stuff is directly feeding into the brand, and then the brand will be a sort of a living sort of version of that. So thank you so much, Andrew. That's all super interesting. I'm just going to let you kind of catch your breath now, because I feel like I've just made you speak for a really long time. Thank you. That's incredible insight, and such great sort of practical tips as well for all of our listeners. Andy, I'm very aware of time, actually. There's so much that we've got, so many questions. There are so many areas that we want to touch on. Can we talk about investing in brand, creation of a strong brand proposition when it comes to securing investment? So, Andy, if we could, can we get your thoughts on that? I know that we've touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, we did touch on it. Yeah, but I think you know, from experience, we've worked with, we've had the privilege of working with different brands at different stages of their life cycle, and some you know, some of them, it comes back to what we said before about knowing your audience, but we've had brands come to us before whose sole kind of objective of embarking on perhaps a brand evolution. You know, Andrew was saying about how it's important to constantly keep up to speed with what the audience, not necessarily the consumer, but the audience expectations. And you know, whether that be, I look at Aduna and I see this beautiful kind of African inspired wallpapers and textures that I think are really, you know, that you wouldn't want to put them in your cupboard almost, because they're almost like you've got them on display behind you, Andrew. But you know, the brand is something you'd be proud to have leave out, as opposed to something else you might want to put away. We've had those conversations with brands before, but from an investment point of view, the audience is looking for something. They're looking for something different, in the sense that they want to see. I think so often a brand can be too narrow. The lens from which it projects stuff can be too narrow. And I think an investment from our point of view, looking at brand through the eyes of an investor, is about, okay, how can this scale? What are we actually looking at doing on day one? What might we be doing in 10 years time, 5 years time? So we have to think about the brand in terms of how it can grow and evolve. We don't want to box ourselves into a corner. And you talk about someone like Innocent earlier on. I mean, what a great kind of stake in the ground for a brand that could go in any direction. Yes, fruit and veg, at their heart, but that doesn't have to be smoothies. That could be all kinds of different things. And it had a huge amount of mileage in that kind of approach. But equally, we work with, talking from experience again, there are brands that come to us with the sole objective. They may well be quite mature, but they're looking for some kind of exit, and they're looking to kind of to appeal to one of the big companies who might come in and kind of snap them up. And that's something that we've done a lot. It was ever present last week in the events I attended. But the gut health market, which Andrew knows all about as well, is a huge area. Which probably when you started Aduna, those years ago, gut health wasn't the conversation. It was more about all the kind of natural and the energy and all of those nutritional benefits. But gut health is now just exploded, and we've seen that beyond in terms of the brands that we've been lucky enough to work with as well. But that market is coming. People are coming into that market with the same narratives about gut health, and there are a lot more people who are educated on that now, and looking and demanding products that fit into that category. But a lot of them are also seeing the opportunity as it's at its earliest stage still in many ways, and the first movers are already out there, and these bigger brands that are potentially looking to get involved might just be better off coming in and snapping up some of the smaller ones. So that's a brand conversation we have as well. Is okay, actually, I want to appeal to an audience, yes, but I also want to put myself in a position where I might commercially achieve my objectives by selling to a P&G or a Unilever or somebody. So yeah, that's an important part of the conversation we need to have, and that comes into the kind of brand planning. Really, is it? What are your objectives? What is the business objective here? Is it to change the world through supply chains? Look at someone like Tony's in the chocolate world. What is their mission? Is it to become bigger than Cadbury's? No. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? And often, to be honest with you, often it is that we've got a 5-year plan, and we want to get snapped up. So let's brand accordingly and work that way.
A question I thought I'd kind of like to get your guys' opinion on is in terms of this idea of building a brand up to kind of sell it ultimately. One of the superpowers of startups in our community is a great brand story. Something, a founder journey or founder experience or something like that. And therefore, a lot of startups build their brand around that idea. But again, going back to the Black Farmer, I mean, talking to him, he's like, well, building the brand around me has made it more difficult to sell. But like Tony's, there are lots of examples where there's a character wrapped up in this.
Yeah.
Where it is sellable.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's one that we see a lot, and actually when you have brands that come to you that are attached to a name of an individual, not necessarily just a mascot, like a fictional character, but if it's actually a name of a founder, which, as you said, Jason, is so, in this world of we're all consumers, and we're all drawn to a story that feels relevant to us somehow, or resonates with us. And the best way to do that is to bring out the human quality of that story. So often we're presented with, if not on the front of pack, a big revelation over the last 10 years really has been back of pack, and the fact that we as consumers are now we might be drawn to the beautiful textures on the Aduna packaging, but I'm gonna walk up and pick up that and turn it around, the pack around, and actually read more about it. Whereas not that long ago we would just throw it in the bag and off we go if it's what we're looking for. So people want to know about that story. So I think the human story is highly relevant. How the effect that has then on the sellability of that brand, and how that scales up is probably a better way of putting it. How do you scale that up? Because at the end of the day, if you're going to grow as a business, eventually you're going to outgrow one or two people's or founder stories. But I think it's having that, and there are lots of good examples of that, as you say, Jason. I think there's one that always springs to my mind is in the Ella's Kitchen or some of those brands where the face of the brand can still be retained, but it's the personality. If you talk about brand stories, you're trying to weave in. I always think of a brand story as kind of like there's a problem, enter the hero, which is our brand, and then explain the kind of impact that brand is having on the world. That's got to come through the eyes of the founder, the person who created, the inventor. But you want to be the Henry Ford of that. You don't want to be, you don't want to be the person whose face is at the very front of everything. You want to be the kind of ethos behind it. And I think that's the trick. And I think to start with, you've got to really put the spotlight on the human, on that story, on the emotional reasons why. But then I think as you grow and as you move, I think that needs to become the kind of values of the business that you instill on everything else. All your HR, all of your internal brand values need to be about that story. And that's where I think you've got a platform for, this is now something that's portable.
Yeah, and
I really agree with that as well. Yeah.
Go on, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, from with Aduna, I think at the beginning, particularly my story was important because people want to know what is the relationship with Africa, why, where does that come from, what is, so my personal story was very important in the early days, and we had it on the website and everything like that. But now, in this transition we're going into now, I feel like it's time to, people who want to find out that information should be able to find it out. Mm-hmm. But rather than, a founder story being, front and center to the brand, as Andy says, we've done a piece of work on our kind of purpose and our value and our values recently, is to kind of distill, what those things are, what the why is, what the purpose is, and what the values are, and then really kind of, have them communicated through the brand itself. And what I still go around and do talks and all the rest of it. So people who want to find out about that, they can. But I think it's an evolution and a maturing of a brand that that happens over time.
Definitely, yeah.
And I was going to say a real pain point I think for founders is when their brand, because they're, like we said, their brand is their communications, and when you start off, you do all your comms yourself. Your tone of voice is your tone of voice, and it's incredibly authentic. Exactly. And kind of separates you from everyone else. And the pain point is when you're like, actually, shit, I got too much else to do. I can't kind of do all that myself. So that's where you need it really kind of so clearly defined.
And actually, that for us is a pain point. That for us has been a real pain point. For me personally, it's been a pain point because it did start that way, and then I got so overwhelmed with everything else that, marketing, even though marketing and branding is probably my forte, I didn't really have to spend any time on marketing and branding because I had a marketing team. And then I think a little bit for me, it's been a little bit painful because I've watched the tone of voice change. And then, the tone of voice has kind of taken on whoever happens to be doing the social media at that time. And so that I think, we had the tone of voice was a kind of vegan health food blogger, which is great because a lot of customers of ours are vegans, but that African vibrancy or the tone of voice that we started with and it's very delicate in that space, also in terms of how you portray Africa, when you're talking about impact, what language you use, everything like that. And so it's it's very difficult, and I think we never had that, having a toolkit or a brand personality toolkit or something that you could pass on from one person to another. Maybe Andy can give some insights about how you manage that.
I could, but I know I'm conscious of time as well. But I just, one thing I would say is it comes back to everything we've talked about, and we've not really discussed this. But I think when you start to grow, exactly as you've done on your journey, Andrew, and you start to bring people in, it just highlights the importance that the perception of, when you talk about brand, I said at the beginning, a lot of people think about visual identity, what we would call in the industry visual identity, your logo and your colors, typography, and all those things. But as we've already discussed, it's so much bigger than that, and it is about that story. It has to start with who you are and your why, as you said. But equally, it's not only, and it mustn't be seen as an externally facing platform. The internal worth, the investment, the return on investment you get from brand internally can be bigger than the external one, certainly on a timeline, because what you need to be doing, your brand should inform your recruitment policies. It should inform the type of people that you surround yourself with, whether they be employees on a permanent basis or contractors or freelancers, whoever they are. They need to understand your brand, and they need to understand it so that then when they're then working with it, they are authentic to that as well. So you've got to hire people and surround yourself with people who buy into your vision, who are passionate about Africa and all of the values that come out of that, so that not only if they're passionate about it, they know about it, because we make it our business to find out a bit more about stuff we're interested in. So I'm not just going back to a brand Bible. It's something I'll be honest, it's something that a lot of agencies, and we're not we're no different, struggle with. That is, how do you create something that you can put a bow on it, give it to someone, and then they will live it and breathe it, and it'll become your kind of voice. But clearly, A, people don't read this stuff, and B, it's you can only signpost so much. There's always going to be things that fall between the cracks.
I think you're right. It's the people, and that's absolutely right. Is the people. I think that for us, it's interesting though, because it's very nuanced. Because every single person we've hired and every single investor that's invested in us has been aligned with the mission, and has come to us because of their passion for the mission. But people have different takes on it. So for one person, they'll be more passionate about the health benefits of the superfood. For another person, they'll be more passionate about particularly the issue of women's cooperatives in Africa, and female empowerment will be something that they're particularly interested in. Another person may be interested in challenging perceptions of Africa, or the communication side of it. So, and all of those, they're all part of our brands, because actually Sarah mentioned that our mission is to improve lives. Our mission is to improve lives. That includes our consumers as well. That includes the health of our consumers and our team and everyone that's involved with Aduna. So it's, but I completely agree with you. Like the tone of voice really comes from the culture, comes from the people, really. And the more organic, the more authentic, the more natural it can be. And I think that's what happened with Innocent, is that at first it was Richard Reed writing the labels himself by hand, and then now everyone knows the Innocent tone of voice, and it's a bit hackneyed now, and lots of people have copied it. And that there's some kind of copywriters that have got a brand Bible of this is you can tell when one turns into the other, can't you?
And that's the downside as well, isn't it? If it becomes too comprehensive, this kind of these directional kind of signposts, if they become too prescriptive, then you end up losing that authenticity that you started with, which is what you got you in the first place. I'm conscious we might be giving our audience more headaches than answers, but I do think that keeping it authentic is got to be, keeping it real, and ultimately making sure that it doesn't become a robotic process of responding, with a sort of script. It has to. We're always telling our clients that we're not going to tell you what to say. We'll give you the direction, the tone, based on what we've got from you, what feels real. But then you have to then put that into your own words, and you have to make sure that that is something that everybody believes in. Because
Andy, just cutting in, because I'm very aware of time. Plus, you've just made a very good point, which is we don't want to give our audience and our listeners too much kind of too much of a headache in terms of all of this information. You are excellent at crystallizing information. So Andy, could you just summarize, could you just talk through maybe the key things to take into consideration when you're really sort of looking to nail your brand positioning?
Wow, I'm not sure I can do that in that's concise. But I think, to be honest with you, I think we, Andrew and Jason have both said this, and we've touched on it briefly. But I think the most important thing is to tap into your kind of why, which is a term that we use a lot. But what do we mean by that? It's not. We're not in this to make a profit. It's not that's not the right answer to that question. It may well be it's a necessity. You need to make money in order to grow and further your journey towards your goal, whatever that might be. But it's kind of what makes you tick. Why are you doing this? Why have you even bothered to go back to what we were saying earlier? Why have you bothered to even go down those farmers markets, on a Sunday morning, peddling this stuff? What gets you out of bed in the morning to do this, as opposed to what you otherwise might have been doing? And it's finding what that authentic reason is, and it's kind of bottling it. You've got to go through that journey that Jason so crucially put through, because you might have a really, really great why that you're passionate about, but no one cares. So you need to find that it resonates. If you're getting a connection with that reason, and you've developed something that people love, ideally, and it's getting traction, then you've then got to kind of expand on that. And I think the advice we've captured in this session today has been valuable for our audience, hopefully, is that you've got to start small. You've got to be willing to change and pivot and learn and listen, but always true to that authentic why I've started in the first place. Don't get, I don't think you can carried away and just following other things that are going on and fads. But then when you get to a point where you've established that, and you've got a point where, I guess, a point of traction where you can see this is going somewhere, that's when you need to think about, okay, I don't want to be changing my voice, changing my brand every 6 months. I need to arrive at a point where I'm going to invest. Maybe that's time more than money, but invest in that and get that into a place where it's going to stay put for a while, so I can grow that.
But that investment is really important, because I think a lot of clients, startups, or kind of those looking to scale up, those brands come to us, the founders come to us, and they deep down they know their why, but perhaps they've never actually been through the process of really crystallizing that purpose, those values, developing that tone of voice that, Andrew, you quite rightly said is so important, especially when you're dealing with the nuances of language and talking about sort of sensitive social issues. So important. And then as you're growing as a team and growing as a business, your onboarding process for your new people who are joining, and your new employees, it's just great for them to be able to kind of pick up your brand book or your playbook and be good to go. But it's just so many of our clients that we work with, once we've kind of helped them to crystallize and really kind of articulate what it is that they're about, they have that real kind of wow moment. It's almost like that relief. You can see the physical relief, because as a founder, you're pulled in a million directions. You're naturally entrepreneurial. You're coming up with so many ideas. You don't necessarily take the time to sit down and really kind of unpack the brand. And then
I think that's why I said earlier about time. I think investment, we talk about investment, it doesn't have to be financial investment. Obviously time and money are directly related, but I do think it's you're right, Sarah, is your why. I talk about why, it doesn't mean anything, but I think it needs to be something. It needs to be a sentence. It needs to just be a handful of words.
And I think kind of, sticking up for the founder here in terms of, why they don't often get round to this, because at the beginning of your journey, you are juggling so many things. Just getting your product made, getting the packaging, getting a barcode, finding manufacturer, talking to retailers, to kind of give your space. It does take a very aware kind of founder to think, right, actually, whoa, what's the whole mission behind this?
I think it's, for we've been on this journey a lot, and it's really interesting because the kind of dawn of purpose branding is probably the last 5 years or so, where the idea of purpose is now kind of probably right in the front of the branding agency toolkit, and purposes are being retrospectively fitted onto big brands, and Unilever is now saying that any brand that doesn't have a purpose will be divested from their portfolio, etc., etc. So purpose is now like completely mainstream. And like for Aduna, we started with a real mission. It was a mission which was to realize, to fulfill the potential of baobab fruit and create demand, and create these sustainable incomes. And yet, despite the fact of the authenticity of our mission, I could not have given it to you in a sentence. And despite the fact that I worked for years in branding and marketing agency, and still wasn't able to do it. And it's really, because we have, if you looked at our website, you'll find 5 or 6 different iterations of our brand, our mission. A mission is this, to beneficial audience, it is this, that, the other. Really confusing and not in consumer language or something that people can understand. So we've just done a piece of work, and it is just as you said, it's like when you nail it, it's like amazing.
Yes.
That's in 6 or 7 words. That is it.
Yeah.
And you've got. And then you do the same with your values, and it's just like, okay, great. Now this is a foundation for everything else.
Yeah, that's so important. I was going to ask everyone, we've literally got like 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left. The time has flown so quickly. I was going to ask all of you guys, if you could, just as one final question, just come up with one action that everyone could take today, all of our listeners, in relation to brand. I mean, I think Andrew has just probably said his right there, which is to really kind of take the time, either work with an agency or work with some kind of trusted individuals to really kind of to just crystallize exactly what it is, what your why is. Jason and Andy, do you have any final thoughts that you could throw in literally about 1 minute 30 seconds?
The one thing I advise people, and I think it really works with branding as well, is listen to people. There are so many startups who are so blinkered. They found their grandma's recipe for a jam, or they've discovered a amazing tea in Taipei. They just focused on this one thing, and they don't listen to the market. You should treat branding, and you should treat building a business like a science experiment. You kind of put something out there, test it. It's a hypothesis. Does it work? If not, test the next one. You really got to listen.
Yeah, I agree.
Has to listen. Great advice as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I just echo both of those statements. I think we have kind of given it, in the sense that I think Andrew's probably summarize how I would put it as well, which is get it down, find your why, articulate what it is you want to do, and make it as long as you want. Write 500 words if you want. We've seen biblical descriptions of how people want to be perceived, but they don't stop until you get it down to a few short words in a sentence.
Keep honing and honing.
Because and keep doing what Jason said, which is, when you've written a sentence, share it. Does it make sense? Do I understand? If not, write it again, and just keep going. It's highly iterative, and we're talking about words here, so keep on going. It can be on the back of a napkin, but you'll get it eventually.
And also, you can find on Google search, there are so many different tools. Brand pyramids, brand circles, brand. They're all
Onions.
Good. Basically, onions.
Yeah.
Find one of those. And then just like populate it and refine it,
and get some help.
Because you even if it's your neighbor, get some help from somebody, because you're right, as Andrew just put, coming from a marketing background, even you found it hard to get down to that without looking for help. And I think fresh eyes and perspective is absolutely, you can't get away from that. You can't do it on your own.